Welcome, everyone. We are here to discuss what was it like returning back to work after experiencing such a tragic loss of loved ones. And I wanted to start by saying my name is Latanya, and I welcome everyone. And again, feel free to express based on your own personal journey. So, what I'd like to talk about and ask the group is, what are some of the things that you wished that you would have liked to know prior to returning to work? Now, returning to work, as we all know, typically when we return to work, it's generally from returning from a nice vacation. But unfortunately, in our case, because we are just experienced the loss of loved ones or a loved one, returning to work can bring so many different emotions, anxiety, unknown, fear. So we're here to ask your personal experience. What was it like for you returning to work? Kathy, I'd like to start with you.
Um, it was actually a welcome distraction after my husband died. I took about a month off of work, and it going back to work provided a sense of normalcy for me. It was a little bit difficult though, because I obviously it's the first time I'd been through this situation, so I didn't exactly know what to expect on the other end from my coworkers, but they were all wonderful, and I they knew. One thing that may happen is that depending on how large your company is or where you work, there may be people that don't know about your spouse or your loved one passing away. In my situation, it was my spouse. So you might have to be prepared to take if they don't know what if you're out for a long time, or maybe they'll just ask, "Oh, how was your vacation?" If they didn't know that it was about a death, and I would say to give those people grace because they don't know. So it just depends on the work setting itself, and to try. I had to take it slow initially, and I still was there by 8 hours, but I had the flexibility to be able to choose what I wanted to dive into first in terms of the actual work, and that was helpful. And again, that's going to depend on what the nature of your job is and what your tasks are. But if you have that flexibility, I would try to be aware of that and maybe think through your first day, like what do you want to start with, and also being able to ask about if you feel you need something to know that it's okay. If you need something from your boss or from a coworker, or maybe that just means some time or some, like I need to be able to get up out of this meeting to take a moment, and I'm just going to get up and go. That's okay. You can ask for that.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Like I was saying, communication is key because you don't really know what to expect of yourself when you return back to work. But not only that, your coworkers are not going to know what to expect from you. So I think it goes hand in hand. I appreciate you sharing that, Kathy. Thank you. Angelique, would you care to share a little bit about what it was like in your personal journey returning back to work?
Thank you, Latanya. I lost my mom in 2018. I lost my partner very unexpectedly in 2023, and I lost my father about 10 months later in 2024. Uh, the loss that was the most profound for me was my spouse. At that point, I had taken about a month off simply because I was trying to function and survive. And when I did return back to work, my circumstance is that I am self-employed and I have a very forward customer-based kind of practice so that when I'm working, I have to be personable, I have to be professional, I had to be very put together, which is a little hard to do when you mourn the loss of the person that you love more than anything in the world. I wish I had known how exhausting it was going to be to have to get up and not only take care of myself and do things like eat and take a shower and sometimes grocery shop, get dressed, do dishes, but also to find the energy with which to present myself in a way that would not allow me to break down every time I saw someone. Sometimes I'd have 5 or 6 clients a day, and it was exhausting. And I wish I had carved out a little bit more space and time to prepare myself mentally, to give myself a little bit extra self-care, to also give myself some patience and perhaps meal prep better, maybe do some grocery shopping delivery, allow myself to have maybe prepping my clothes for the next day so I wouldn't have to think quite as much in the morning, which sounds kind of silly, but quite honestly, there was just very little energy for me in those moments balancing grief and working. So I think if you are a person that is returning to work, whether you have to return, I've heard some horror stories of people going back like the next 2 days, or you have the luxury, as I did, to spend a little bit more time in a bereaved state, know that it will be a taxing and very potentially debilitating experience. And that's kind of normal. It just adds to it,
Mhm.
even though sometimes it is a welcome distraction. Be prepared that you might need a little bit of extra self-love.
hmm Excellent points, Angeli. And because of your particular line of work, it's almost like a mental split, right? Because not only do you have to split your brain, so to speak, from grieving to customer and then transition back, that's also a mental skill, if you will. So we appreciate you sharing that. Thank you, Angelique. Sandra, would you care to share how the experience was for you and based on your personal grief journey?
I was off work for 4 months. It was rough because I wasn't sleeping. I still get very little sleep. So I had to mentally prepare myself to go back in because I work at a lockbox department and we deal with a lot of paperwork and stuff like that. So, before I was going, I had like a lot of anxiety. I was crying every day. I cried on the way to work. I cried when I got there, and just the mental thing of I didn't want to walk into everybody saying, I'm sorry for your loss because people hadn't saw me in 4 months, but they knew what had happened. And I knew it was going to break me down by hearing from that. And then, you know, my job is kind of hard. I had a lot of pictures of my husband up at the job and, just the anxiety of getting up and mentally going. And every day, we used to live like 5 minutes from my husband's job, 15 minutes from my job. So in the mornings, I would drop him off. So it was like when I got up, get ready to go on my first day, it was hard not knowing that I'm not going to be taking him to work first, and then just going myself straight to work. So it was really hard for me. I'm getting it now. I've been there for over a month now and back to work. And it's still hard going to work every morning, going there. And I feel like breaking down. I took the pictures down. I may put them back up, but it was just people who hadn't saw me. Like she said, it was asking me like, "Oh, where you been? You was been off. You been sick." And these are the people who knew me, who knew not my husband, but I have so many pictures. They knew of him. Then they'd ask me, where you been? And then I'd explain to them that my husband passed away and breaking down at work. So it was just that when I walked in, several people did hug me and I tried to hold it together, but I had to go to the bathroom. So it was just a mental of just returning and knowing that when I get back home, he's not going to be there because he get off before me and he'd be at home. It's just knowing that he's not going to be home when I get home every day for the first, I'd say, 2 or 3 weeks. It was hard for me. So
Mm.
I'm getting used to coming in and he's not going to be here now, but I don't think I'm never going to be used to him not being here. So it's hard every day.
Thank you. And I'm sure, based on what you shared, Sandra, most of us can also relate to that because not only are we dealing with the change of coming back to work, we're also dealing with the change throughout the course of our work day. How many of you are used to calling certain people during the workday and say,
My,
"Hey, I'm just checking in on you," or more so receiving the call from your loved one, or sometimes lunchtime. Oh, I'm just going to do this for lunchtime. Now that's all changed, right?
We used to
So,
FaceTime each other every day at lunch.
mm-hmm,
That was
mm-hmm.
the hardest thing too.
Yeah. So to that point, not only is it a change in returning to work, our patterns, the way we do things throughout the course of the workday has also changed. Thank you, Sandra, for sharing that. Karen, would you care to share what it was like for you based on your personal experience?
Yes, thank you, Latanya. So my husband passed away suddenly and unexpectedly in 2023. At the time, I was self-employed as an independent contractor working on a matter with a colleague for a client, and there were third parties involved that we were negotiating with. So, very similar to what Angelique described, um, I had to sort of be very professional and hold it together. And I was fortunately able to sort of manage the schedule. My husband passed 3 weeks before our son's wedding, which was the day after our anniversary. So we had planned a 2 week time period that I was going to be out. So, I had done a lot of work. We had deadlines. So I had managed to get things in. And I waited a few days before I told my colleague because just the shock of everything, sort of dealing with that. And so when I did return to work, which was about probably about 3.5 weeks after he passed, it was welcomed in the sense that I needed something that was some semblance of normality that kept my thoughts away from the pain that I was seeing, the reminders. And I worked primarily remotely. So we would do, video conferences, that sort of thing. And as soon as the conference is over, you're just reminded in the quietness of your home that, I'm alone now. He's not here. He was often there. Um, Two things that I found especially challenging, well, three things. One is dealing with the other parties because we had to communicate about scheduling, that sort of thing. And they were very kind and gracious, and I really appreciate that. But the first time I heard them mention apologies because they had learned about my husband, it was hard. It was just very hard hearing it from someone that I wasn't, close to, because it made it seem another, piece of evidence that this is real, this is
Yeah.
permanent, right? The
Mhm.
second thing is the focus, the fog, the brain fog that comes with grief, and time management. Those two things, because time for me, my perception of it changed greatly. It moved fast and slow simultaneously. And so, what helped me somewhat was sort of setting a timer on my phone for at least once an hour, sometimes more, depending on how the day was going. And that was sort of my self check to stop, assess what progress I was making. Did I need to change, the way I was approaching something, go take a walk, do something outside, something completely different, because I needed some physical reminder about, hey, maybe my perspective needs to be adjusted a little bit. Because when you're doing something where you're researching or you're writing and it's very precise or whatever, man, that brain fog,
Yeah.
it can really work on you. And, I had an obligation to my client and to my colleague that I took very seriously, very personally. And so I wanted to make sure that while, yes, it helped me to work, I was turning over what I needed for them, that it was reasonable as far as how much time I was spending, that I was meeting the deadlines, and the quality of work was good. And that is a challenge, especially early on in the, first, say, 6 months at least.
Way that you allow yourself time to regroup, reassess. So I love that you do that for you. And also that falls into a bucket of self-care, right? Because a lot of times I know for me, I'm a prime example of what you call a workaholic. I think in my own personal journey, returning back to work, like Kathy mentioned, it was a thing that kind of kept me busy. But the reality is, you're going to have those moments, you're going to have those triggers where you just go from here down to a plateau of, wow, this is real. This is the reality. So I love that you found something that worked for you based on your personal journey. Thank you for sharing that, Karen.
Thank
Okay, last but not least, my dear Maria, would you care to share how it was returning to work based on your grief journey?
Yeah. And so most of you know my husband passed almost 4 years ago, but I had retired. But when I saw the email, I thought of the other big loss in my life, which was my mother. And she died. Today is 36 years since she passed. For me to return back to work was, and I didn't know the word back then, but I was anxious because she died in the nursing home that I worked in. So it was okay, I've got to get to work. And the expectation was, okay, you've had time off. And there was no FMLA. I had 3 kids. So I took a week off, but I had to go back to work. And I remember there were a few people who were very supportive and um, kind of made sure I was okay that when I did things. But the hardest part was going down the hallway that my mom's room was on. And that was so hard. But I was fortunate that the director of nursing was really good. She allowed me a little time before I had to really go back down there. And I knew eventually this is my job. I have to do it. But I just remember every day my stomach was in knots because I had to go back to work and I knew she wouldn't be there. And my aunts thought it was the best thing for her to be there. But in hindsight, it was harder on me. So to go back, and then I had to go back to work, keep doing what I was doing, and still take care of 3 kids. So I had those 3 to take care of. So it was just, I put everything in a compartmentalized, this is work, come home, take care of the kids. My mom lived downstairs from me. Her house was still there. So it was all that. And every day I went to work, everything was a constant reminder that she wasn't there. But I think for me then, like I say, my coworkers made the transition a lot easier than it, they just made it easier. They were supportive. If there was times that they knew I needed to cry, they were very good about that. So that was, I just think about that.
Hmm. Thank you, Maria. And that brings me to another point. Not only are we all trying to adjust to the new normal, we're trying to adjust to work-life balance, right? And also, like you mentioned, Maria, your coworkers, they're also trying to adjust to us, right? What was normal for them now has changed because A, they don't know how to approach us because it's more like walking on eggshells, right? And then once they are aware of our current situation of grieving for the loss of our loved ones, now how would they react? What would they expect from us? So it kind of plays back and forth, if you will. But I think that's really nice that your coworkers also made the workplace for you accommodating as well. Because I know in my own personal journey, returning back to work after the loss of my only son, it was 3 years prior. My son would always drop me off to work in the car that I'm driving that we were going to gift him as a gift. Now, when I leave my workplace, as I'm walking toward that vehicle, it's a trigger. that he's no longer in the car picking me up, right? He's no longer in that car asking me, can I borrow a few bucks, right? He's no longer in that car telling me how his day was, and I would reciprocate and tell him how my day was. So there are different triggers, there are different atmospheres that we're now exposing ourselves to. And what we once took for granted, get up, come to work, come home, fix dinner, that all has changed, right? Just like Angelique mentioned, the pattern is no longer what we're used to. The one thing that I wanted to close with is I think about return when it comes to returning to work, I think about the acronym SOS. Okay. Typically, when we think of SOS, that is a signal for help, right? But in our grief journey, our personal grief journey, SOS can stand for secure a safe place, okay? Occupy a safe place for us to go and let out some of the emotion, right? And the other S stands for set boundaries. Set boundaries for others. So when they approach you and say, hey, Kathy, Sandra, Karen, Maria, Angelique, Augusto, is there anything I could do? What happened? You were gone for such a long time. Is everything okay? Sometimes we may not be ready to talk about that loss, right? So let's set boundaries. Depending on how comfortable you feel in discussing it, that's perfectly fine. But then there are other days where you're not comfortable talking about it, right? When it comes to that safe place, if you feel emotional, go to your safe place, even if it means walking out and just taking a walk around the building or going to the restroom, going to a break room, but allowing yourself that time. Hey, Latanya, I need to sit back. Hey, Karen, I need time just to kind of reflect, right? And then over maybe as much time as I need, now I feel that, okay, I have enough energy, I have enough self-patience to continue. Because self-care is just as equally as important as what we do in our daily lives. Okay, I hope that was helpful for everyone. And again, thank you so much for joining this session.